access, and then you will get an automatic email that, okay, your article has been, your paper has been accepted, and this is the charges, this is the article processing fee. And then you say that, oh, no, and then you come back and say, oh, no, sorry, I just clicked it by mistake, and yeah. So, but yeah, coming back to your question, so this green gold open access, it really depends on the journal. So it varies from journal to journal, the policy that exactly they follow, depending on the, the copyright, then the permission to reuse, to republish, or to, use it for like personal dissemination. So it really depends on the, yeah. Open access journals usually don't have print copies. Open access journals are online only. Right. Well, that's what I was mentioning, that all these predatory journals, yeah, that's the big problem, because they're online only. Okay. Open access, even all the good open access journals, they're online only. And that's the advantage, because that's why you have a shorter publication time, you have lesser restrictions on words and pages. So that's the idea.
But in some of the SCI index journal also we can see that, like
you can see
open access and all those things.
Yeah, but then if it's only open access, that's what I said. If it's only open access journal, it should be online only. Okay. Only online. So no print editions, no hard copies. Yes.
Open access journals are better than the subscribed journals, right? Because everybody can view it.
No. This is again very vague thing. What do you mean open access journals are better than subscribed? So in what?
Online, if it comes online, then anybody can view it, and citation is also possible, so that it will improve the impact factor.
Yeah, but what do you mean?
If it is a hard copy available means,
it has nothing to do with
the accessibility is less.
I mean, accessibility is less, of course. I mean, that's the difference between open access and subscription-based journals. Open access is, that's what I said, it's freely accessible to anyone and everyone who has an internet connection. That's it. But it doesn't mean that that subscription-based journals don't have an impact factor, or their chances of being cited or getting read is less. Of course, all the big journals, the top journals, they have subscriptions. They are like subscribed to all across the world. All the top universities, institutes, organizations across the world, they have subscriptions to all the top journals in every field, in whichever field they are working. So it doesn't mean that if you are publishing in a subscription-based journal that you will never be read or you will never be cited. So the reason why subscription journal is a subscription journal. Yes. You are willing to pay for it. Yes, exactly. Right? That's yes. That's why it's still a subscription.
Even for some open access journal also, only the abstract is available online. For getting the full manuscript, they have to pay for it.
No, open access, that's not open access then.
Okay.
No, if you're talking about that, that's not open access. That's a subscription-based journal. So if you have to pay for anything, then it's a subscription-based journal. Open access is open access, it's free. Yes, of course, yeah. Well, again, it depends, like, authors or, funders, yes. All right, okay, so yeah, so we were still talking about this, identifying whether a journal is reliable or not. So to talk on the same topic, so there is a free website. It's called thinkchecksubmit.org, and it's a very useful one, because if you log on to this website and you click on this check button, all right. So you click on this check button, it pops up a box of questions. So I guess you can't read the questions from there, but it's actually related to the points that I already mentioned in the previous slide. So the first one says that, do you or your colleagues know the journal? The next one is, can you easily identify and contact the publisher? The third one is the journal clear about the type of peer review it uses? The next one is, are articles indexed in services that you use? Is it clear what fees will be charged? Do you recognize the editorial board? And is the publisher a member of a recognized industry initiative? So the idea is that if you log onto this website and you click on this checklist, and if you can answer a confident yes to all these questions listed here, okay? So you have to be like 100% sure that you can say yes to each and every of these questions listed here, then you should be satisfied that you're good to go, all right? The journal is worth relying on, okay? So it's a very useful one. So you can always, if you're in a doubt, you're not sure about the journal, about the the reliability of the journal, you can always go to that. The other useful thing that we have something called Springer Journal Suggester. So the website is called journalsuggester.springer.com. So if you log on to this website, so you'll have like a box, and since you have your manuscript, what you can do is you can just copy paste your title here. All right, put the copy paste the title in this upper box here, and then in the next box is written manuscript text. Please don't copy the entire text. Just copy the abstract of your paper and paste it here, and then you run it. You hit it, and then what it will do is it will throw up a list of names of journals which might be relevant to your work. But then again, it will only, you have to understand that this is a Springer Journal suggester, so it will only show the names of Springer journals, all right? So not from other publishers, only Springer journals. Again, I think it's useful, okay, but I wouldn't say that, you know, this is the best possible way to identify a journal. For me, if you ask me personally, the best way to identify a journal is to read yourself. Because the more you read, as I already said in the beginning, the more journal articles you read, the different journals you read, the better idea you have, like which journal publishes what kind of paper. And once you have your manuscript, then you exactly know your manuscript would fit into which journal or what kind of a journal. So the best, of course, these are only, you know, like some aids, some external help to guide you. But this is not really a sure shot way, because anyway, these kind of things, you know, they run on a mix and match algorithm. So it will just try to match a few keywords from your title and from your abstract, and then it will try to just like run through all the journal articles and then just throw up the names which appear with the maximum number of hits or the maximum number of similarity with those keywords. That's it. So it might not be at all, maybe the first top 10 journals that it shows might not be at all actually relevant or might not be actually interesting for your journal. All right. So if you ask me, I would always say that the best way to pick a journal is read. Okay, just read as many journal articles and as many different journals as you can. It really gives you the best possible idea about which journal to pick. Okay. All right. So now, since you have chosen the most appropriate journal and you have the perfect written manuscript. So what is next? You are good to submit, right? So you're all set. So what happens is that once you have decided to submit the manuscript to a journal, what you need to write again is a cover letter, all right? And this cover letter is very, very important because it is the piece of paper or piece of document which the journal editor will read the very first thing before even looking at your manuscript. So this is the place where you have the chance to make the best first impression on the journal editor's mind. So these are certain key things which you have to keep in mind when you're writing the cover letter. So of course, the first thing is that you have to convince the journal editor about the significance and the importance of your study and why it's relevant for that journal. Why should it be considered for publication in that particular journal? Because it's the journal editors, you know, like they are also, they wish to improve the quality of the journal and they wish to improve the reputation of their journal. That's the journal editor's responsibility. So if the journal editor finds that your work is not really interesting or appealing, would not be appealing to the readers of that particular journal, he will not even care to send it for peer review, all right? So he will just reject it directly. So it will come back to you from the journal editor's desk. So now it's up to you that you have to convince the journal editor about the relevance of your work and how it actually satisfies the criteria and why it should be considered for publication in that particular journal. And apart from that, once again, so this is the place that the cover letter is the piece of writing where you actually, the journal editor actually gets an idea about your writing style, once again. So if your cover letter is not clearly written and if it's not easily comprehensible, of course the journal editor won't even care to look at your manuscript, because if you cannot write a simple cover letter clearly and properly, you definitely will not be able to write an article, right? Yeah, it's not expected that you'd be writing a very scientifically and grammatically sound article. So that's why these are two important things which you have to keep in mind, okay, when you're writing the cover letter. So once again, the key is, as I mentioned while we were talking about the abstract, that when you're writing the cover letter, keep it simple, okay, and write short sentences, simple, short sentences, all right? That's the key. Okay, so what should we include in the cover letter? So of course, the first key is try to keep it within a page. Don't write like history about, so sometimes, you know, like the cover letter should not be longer than your actual manuscript. So try to really keep it short. Try to keep it within a page. It should always begin with the first thing is you should directly address the cover letter to the journal editor, all right? Don't like think, I mean, sometimes we see things like to whom it may concern. You know, no, please don't write that. It's terrible. Okay, so directly address the journal editor, right? Dear editor, or if you know the name, dear doctor, dear professor, whatever. Okay, the first line of the cover letter should always contain the title of your manuscript and the type of your article. So whether it is a review article, whether it is a letter to the editor, whether it is a comment, whether it is original research article or whatever. So you should always start off with the title and the kind or the type of the article that you wish to publish. Of course, then you just give a very brief background of your research and the problem, and yeah, what is the aim, what is the goal of your study. And then again, of course, yeah, just briefly, very briefly talk about your study design and just summarize the key findings, okay, just the key results. Don't go on writing about everything that you found in like from figure 1 to figure 10, okay. And of course, in the conclusion part of towards the latter part of the cover letter, this is the most important part of a cover letter, is that you really, as I already mentioned in the previous slide, that you have to convince the journal editor that your work is interesting for the readership of the journal. It is very relevant for the people of the journal, and to convince the journal editor of that, you should be very familiar, and that's what I mentioned a while ago, that you should carefully read the aims and scope of any journal before you submit, before even you think of submitting an article there. You should be very familiar with it, and you should know exactly what kind of articles they publish, what are they looking at, what are their target audiences, all right? So that when you, it really helps, trust me, it really helps to write the cover letter when you're actually writing it, because if you are not convinced yourself, you will never be able to convince the journal editor. And if you're not able to convince the journal editor, you will never get published, all right? That's important. All right, and in the additional information, of course, this is also something, it is a little journal dependent, I would say, but it's always advisable if you can suggest names of potential reviewers, all right, who you believe can provide an unbiased feedback on your work. At the same time, if you wish to exclude any people like any potential reviewers, you can also mention it towards the end of your cover letter that, you know, like you would like to, we would appreciate if the following people or if the following group of people are not considered as potential reviewers due to some conflict of interest or some potential conflict of interest. You can always mention that, all right? This is something, I mean, I can tell you that, yeah, if you mention someone or some people or some group of people who you would like to be excluded as potential reviewers, this is something which is always counted, okay? Because of course, as publishers, we also we wish to avoid any kind of conflict between anyone, okay? All right, and then the most relevant part, I mean, especially when we're talking about publishing in the present day scenario, is publication ethics. Now, publication ethics is something which encompasses a lot of things, all right? So we'll talk about this. I'll just give you a brief glimpse because I don't think we have time to talk about everything in detail. But anyway, the first thing, of course, when you're talking about the ethics is that you should be clear that your work is original and unpublished. So what does original mean? That you have not copied your work from anywhere. So I guess you're all familiar with the word plagiarism, right? Is there anyone who doesn't know what plagiarism means? Or what do you think plagiarism means? Can anyone explain? Yes, anyone? Please?
Borrowing someone's ideas or findings without...
Borrowing, you mean to give it back? No, you won't.
Using it without referring to them.
Using it?
Without citing their name.
Not, yeah? Sorry? Similarity in what? So only someone else's, you mean? Yes, and only someone else's, you mean? Someone else's work? No. And if it's your own? Without consent, and if it's your own, what happens if it's your own? Then it's not, it's fine. It's not fine, right? Of course, because plagiarism in any form is not acceptable, all right? So if there is, even if it's your own work and you have published a paper or a book or an article or whatever, and like an online report or something, you cannot reproduce it in exactly the same form, even if you cite it properly, all right? Even if you give proper citation, you cannot just copy and paste other people's work just like that, all right? So this is something very, very important nowadays, and you have to remember that it's very, very easy to find out if some text or any data or any figure, it has been copied or not. So I know, like sometimes it's very tempting when you read an article or a paper or a book or whatever, and you find something, very well written, and you wish how like badly you could write that and you could use exactly those same expressions and same sentences. but trust me, it does no good to your reputation, all right? It's much better that you write a bad article, okay? You can't write properly, it's fine, just write whatever you can. Get it checked by your supervisor or your seniors or even your friends who you think is maybe they're better at writing than you are. That's always a much better option than actually going online and just, you know, like taking parts from here and there and then making a wonderfully written paper, and which when submitted, it will just take a few minutes to find out how much you have copied and from where you've copied, okay? So my message is that please don't resort to any kind of unfair practice when you're thinking about writing your article or doing your research and publishing your results, all right? It's very, very easy and very simple nowadays to find out, okay? So this is something, and it's also when it, as I mentioned, it's also about doing your own, like citing or publishing your own work. Of course, sometimes I understand when you're talking about, you know, like methods, let's say. When you're talking about methods or you're talking about tools or describing the experimental techniques, it cannot be, of course, you're using the same experimental technique or the same tools. You cannot write like 5 different things or 5 different ways when you're writing 5 different articles. But still, you can always paraphrase, right? You can still always rewrite parts of it. You cannot, yeah, it has to be, the idea has to be the same. It cannot change, all right? So when we're looking at this, is something also very interesting. When you're looking at these plagiarism reports, of course, the introduction methods, that's one thing. But if we see that, if we find that the results and the discussion, the conclusion, these have a significant overlap, you know, like significant is anything which is like even more than 5% or 6%, let's say, we are strongly discouraged to accept them. Because if it's something which is in the introduction, if it's something general, or you're talking about the, you know, as I said, the experimental setup or the tools or the methods, I understand that, okay, so if people, you have been using it for maybe 10 years, you have been writing about it for 10 years, of course it cannot be so different every time you write an article. Maybe you publish 20 articles on that, right? But when you're talking about the results, you're discussing your results and your conclusion sections, yeah, these cannot be same, of course. It cannot be, of course. It has to be, you're publishing a new paper because you got something new, you got some new results. So obviously your discussion and your conclusion cannot be the same as something which you have already previously published, okay? So the idea is that please be as frank and as honest as possible, right? It will, trust me, it will be much better in the long term, okay? So the second point is, of course, that you should mention that your article is not under consideration in any other journal. So of course, avoid multiple submissions. This is also something which we always say. This is not healthy, let's say, and this is not really good practice. So of course, yeah, try to submit one journal at a time. Okay, fine. If you reject it, then you submit in another one. That's fine. It's different. All right. So again, authorships. Yeah, this is another thing which is important, that you have consulted your co-authors, and all the authors, they agree on submitting the article to that particular journal. And talking about this, conflicts of interest. Of course, if there is any potential conflict of interest with any party involved, it might be authors, or it might be reviewers, it might be anyone else, please mention it in the cover letter. Yeah, this is something which, yeah, which the journal editors are also, they take note of it because it's important. And when we are talking about the authors, and we'll come to that later, but yeah, when talking about the authors, I should mention something, because yeah, so I said that, yeah, conflict of interest here. We say something that is that ghost authors and guest authors are not allowed, all right? They are not permitted. So what do you mean by a ghost author? Do you know what a ghost author is? So somebody who has actually contributed towards your work, and he or she doesn't find a name on the author list due to whatever reason that might be. Okay, that amounts to publication malpractice. Okay, and similarly, there are no guest authors. So guest authors, like somebody who has had no significant intellectual contribution to your work, towards the work, deserves no place on the author index. So it's not as if my supervisor is an author on my paper, because just because he's my supervisor, right? No. If the person has had absolutely no significant intellectual contribution, okay, maybe you had discussed with him like some place, sometime for 5 minutes, and he gave you some piece of advice, he doesn't get an authorship for that. Okay. Yes? No, that works the other way around, you know, because yeah, that works for people who are not really confident enough about their work that they can publish it by themselves, and then they try to, you know, like grab onto, like hang on to some big name so that they can publish their work. So that's what I'm saying. So that is not fair. That is not fair, and that if actually it's found out, and if somebody, it does happen, I mean, you know, sometimes the authors come back and they complain to the publishers that I did not give my consent to be included as an author on this paper, or I was not informed properly that I was an author on this paper. And if that happens, so your paper will be retracted from publication. And trust me again, that is not good for your reputation. All right. So I know, I mean, I totally understand what you're trying to say, and I am familiar with this practice as well. Yes. Yes, no, it's true. It's not a story, it's true. It does happen actually. Yeah. Yeah. But then idea is that the people, yeah, they are just, I think it's sad for the people because they are not, you know, confident enough about their work that they can publish it by themselves. They always have to hang on to some big names. Why? Because if you think you have done something good and something original, why should you care about names? You just go and publish it. That's it. Yeah. It's easy, I mean, yeah. The process is easy, that's what I mean. Of course, it's not easy to always get published, but sure. So that's about the conflict of interest. So yeah, so make sure that nobody, you know, is left out who deserves a name on your journal, and nobody is included who does not deserve a place on the manuscript. Okay. Funding, of course, this is again, you can always mention it in the letter. Sometimes you can also usually you also mention it in the acknowledgement section of your article. That's fine. Authorship contributions, this again depends on journals. It varies from journal to journal. Sometimes the journals, they ask you to mention it at the end, maybe after or before the acknowledgement. Otherwise, you can always mention it in the cover letter if you wish. So I guess you know what authorship contributions means, right? Anyone doesn't understand what authorship contributions mean? Authorship contributions means like who has done what, okay? So you have like 5 authors, A, B, C, D, E. So maybe A and B designed the experimental setup, C and D performed the experiment, and E was responsible for the, you know, like supervision of the setup. B and E wrote the manuscript together, and everybody provided equal intellectual input. So that is what we mean by authorship contributions, okay? So which author has contributed to what? That is the significance of this, okay? Good. Anyone? Yeah. Yes, that's what I mentioned because it varies from journal to journal. That's what I said. You can always, that's why you can mention it in the cover letter. It's always useful if you can mention it. Yeah, journals it really depends because some journals ask for it, some journals don't. So then again there is no hard and fast rule for that. Yeah. No, that is different. That is not contribution. That is affiliation. Yeah, that is affiliation. Who works where? That's it. No. Yeah, I understand. Yeah. So that's what I mean. So yes, it depends on some journals because most of the, if you look at the Nature journals paper, all Nature papers, they always have authorship contributions after the acknowledgement, just before the references. All right. So now, once you have convinced the journal editor that your manuscript is suitable to be considered for publication, the next hurdle in your process, in the publication process, is peer review, right? Because if the journal editor is convinced that your work deserves to be considered in the journal, so the journal editor will send it out to the reviewers, the peer reviewers, for their feedback. So now when you think about peer review, it's not like what this image shows, okay? So this is what I always tell people, that don't try to take peer review as a negative process. Nobody is after your head. Nobody is going to kill you or plans to kill you, intends to kill you. It's not like that, okay? And as they say, you know, like anything which doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. So we always say that peer review, I mean, we advise students, especially the younger people, that you have to understand that peer review is a positive and a constructive process, okay? Why? Because you have to remember that all these, the reviewers, the peer reviewers, they are experts in the field, okay? So they have been working for years and years, and they are all like really, they know what they're doing. They are like completely thorough with the field, and they are giving you some advice on how to improve your manuscript, all right? I understand, I mean, yeah, again, I can tell you from personal feelings, it feels terrible when you get a rejection, okay? It really feels awful, and you feel that, okay, I mean, yeah, you get like, you know, like bad referee reports and it's not acceptable and whatever, and you feel like completely disappointed and dejected, and you realize that, okay, there's no point. But it's nothing like that, all right? It's absolutely nothing like that, because you have to understand that this is something which you have to take it in a positive way and use it to your advantage, okay? The other point is, of course, that peer review, the other advantage is that it only ensures that the relevant studies, the relevant papers are published. If there was no peer review, imagine, yeah, anything and everything would get published, isn't it? So there would be no filtering, so to say. But peer review ensures that only the relevant studies, only the work which are relevant, which are useful, which are important, they get published. And in the process, what happens is that it helps to advance the field. Okay, it helps in the building up, in the advancement of the field. And the other point which you should also remember is that apart from being experts, the peer reviewers, they are doing most of this review for free. All right, so it's basically a community service. It's like a community service for them. So some expert people, they are giving you free advice, taking out free time from their busy schedule. So obviously you shouldn't throw it away or just completely dump it. All right. So it has some significance, and you have to understand that. So you have to realize that. So what happens is that, so if you look at so this is basically like a kind of a flow chart of your manuscript. I'll just see all of it, and then we will discuss. Oh, takes time. So what happens is that, okay, so these are the options. So this is the possible route of your manuscript. So once you submit your manuscript, of course, the journal editor takes a look at it, and he looks at your cover letter and the manuscript, and okay, he decides immediately, the journal editor, that whether it's like suitable for review or like should it be considered for publication or not. If yes, then he sends it out for peer review. If no, it's rejected immediately. So journal editor sends it back to you. Now if it goes, once it goes to peer review, for peer review, the peer reviewers, they review your paper and they come back to the journal editor with their feedback, with their comments and feedback. And the journal editor has a look at the comments and feedback, and then the journal editor decides that whether the article deserves a revision or not. So journal editor again has two options. He might look at the reports and then decide that, okay, both the reports are maybe 2 or 3 or whatever, a majority of the reports are negative. It doesn't deserve to be published. So once again it's rejected. You get a rejection letter from the editor, from the journal editor. But the journal editor might also feel that it deserves, maybe they have the referees or the reviewers, they have raised some comments and some questions, and this could be addressed, or if the author should be given a second chance of revising. Okay, so then the journal editor gets back to you and tells you that, okay, so these are the list of these are the comments, so the feedback we have received from our reviewers, and would you like to address them, or would you like to resubmit a revised manuscript? Okay, so and you have to understand that this whole process is a time-consuming process, okay? Because journal editors are also very busy people, right? They have they have their full-time jobs, they are doing research, or they are teaching, and they are also doing it like in some free time of theirs. So of course, it's not easy. It's not an easy task, especially if they have to manage, like hundreds or thousands of articles every year, or even on a monthly basis. It really depends on the journal workflow. So anyway, so the idea is that you have to remember that in this whole process, in this whole summation process, the journal editor holds all the cards. Okay, so he or she is the most important person in this your whole journey of your manuscript. So you should be very careful to not step on the wrong foot. All right, let's put it that way. So you have to try to make the journal editor's life easy, okay, and not give him a hard time. So if the journal editor comes back to you, so let's say he receives the reviewer's comments, referee's feedback, and he comes back to you and he asks you to submit a revised version. So when you are submitting a revised version, what happens is that you have to again write a small response letter. So when you have revised the article and you're writing the response letter to the journal editor, and because you wish to resubmit the article. So when you're writing the response results, the most common mistake which sometimes or like very often is found is that people only state that, okay, revisions were done. Revisions were made, but then we don't know where. All right, the journal editor doesn't know where. Where did you then? Because then he has to go back to your revised manuscript and compare it to your original manuscript and hunt through the whole revised manuscript to see where you actually did the revision or what were the revisions done. Right. So basically, that's what I mentioned, that they are busy people and you don't really want to waste their time. Right. So what you should do is, of course, when you're writing this cover letter, the resubmission cover letter, briefly state like what were the revisions made. And to make it easier for them to find, you should always try to refer to the page and the line numbers. Make a small list Okay, attach like a separate sheet, write the page and the line numbers where the modifications or the corrections were done, or the changes were incorporated. And the other thing is, it always helps is if you can highlight the revised text. Wherever you have added some text or you've incorporated some new text, you can highlight that. It's very easy to do it nowadays with all the, like this PDF and Adobe tools or whatever you have. Okay, because what happens is this makes it easy, actually much easier for the journal editor to locate and to find what were the changes made and where were they made, where were they done. All right. So what are the journal editors looking for? So when you're resubmitting a revised version of your manuscript, what are they looking for? So of course, if you agree or disagree with the reviewer's comments. So if you agree with the reviewer's comments, whatever the questions that were raised by the reviewers, then it's absolutely fine, all good, fine, everyone is happy. But if you disagree with the comments there or the points that were raised by the referees, you must give a sound scientific argument or a reasoning. Just don't say that, no, I don't like what he said, what the reviewer said, or I don't agree with what he said. No, that's not enough. All right? If you don't agree with the reviewer's comments, you have to provide a good enough argument as to why you don't agree with the reviewer. Right? So this is something that is very important, and of course, you have to, support your argument with some evidence or with some decision. The other thing is, of course, this I already mentioned, that if you have revised text or figures, please mention them, okay, where you have actually done the modifications or the corrections or the new text was incorporated. If you have performed new studies or new experiments, please highlight them in the cover letter, mention that these studies were done or these additional tests were done, these figures have been included, or one or two figures have been changed or excluded, so that it becomes, as I said, you have to remember that you want to make his job easy. You don't want to give him a hard time, all right? You just make his job as easy as it can be, okay? And of course, this, as I already mentioned, that please highlight and mention where exactly you have made the changes, okay? So once you have done that, it often happens that the journal editor has a look at your cover letter and the revised manuscript, and the journal editor himself or herself can take a decision just based on the revisions that were done and the cover letter that you submit, that if the article is suitable enough to be considered for publication. Because the journal editor might not send it back again for a second round of review, because if he or she is satisfied that you have incorporated all the changes and he or she is happy with all the changes that were done and the revisions that were made, your paper has a very high chance of getting published, all right, without actually going for a second round of review. Okay? But again, if he is not convinced, then it might always happen that the journal editor will send it back for another round of review process, and then again, of course, it goes on like this. And this whole process, it can take anything between 2 months to a year, all right? So it really depends. So of course, you should not expect that you submit an article to a journal today, and then within a couple of weeks, you should get the result, or you get the feedback, or your paper is accepted, okay? So it's a long process, it's a long run process, it's not an easy process, but of course, if you are careful and if you are sincere, you can always successfully manage to get through, okay? All right. So just to summarize then, so today what we have seen is that in order to be an effective communicator, the first thing is, of course, you need to logically organize your ideas throughout the manuscript so that your readers, they get a very clear view of what you have done and what you want to say. The second one, of course, we have seen that how do you pick a journal, how to choose the most appropriate journal for your work so that you reach the correct, like the audience.